A 3-year-old falls to his death from a floor with no railing in a building where officially nobody should be living. No elevators, no running water, no windows. A building that never got its opening day. And yet for almost a decade, more than 5,000 people called that place home. Every day they climbed 20, 30, even 40 floors, hauling water, gas canisters, and groceries in a 45-story tower with not one working elevator. It was supposed to be the Wall Street of Caracas. It ended up being the largest vertical slum on the planet. And here's the strangest part. According to the architects who studied it closely, that illegal city, born in the ruins of a bankrupt bank, worked better than plenty of legally built neighborhoods in that same Caracas. It's called the Tower of David, and what you're about to see explains how that happened. A 45-story financial skyscraper right in the middle of a capital city, abandoned mid-construction for 15 years. Thousands of people moving in, no engineers, no permits, building a whole system of life inside it. Shops, a church, internal transport, rules stricter than any legal building in the city. And in the end, a golden lion at the Venice Biennale, architecture's most prestigious prize in the world. The question running through this whole story repeats in every city on the planet where there's an unfinished building sitting empty. What do people build when the state disappears? Let's start at the beginning. Caracas, late 1980s. Venezuela is riding an oil-fueled banking boom, and banker David Brillembourg launches a pharaonic project in the city's financial heart, the Confinanzas Financial Center, meant to house the Metropolitan Bank's headquarters and its whole financial group. This isn't one building. It's a full complex of 6 structures, a main tower, Tower A, 171 meters tall with 45 floors and a rooftop helipad, a smaller second tower planned as an apart hotel, an auxiliary building known as Building K, a commercial atrium for meeting rooms, and a 14-level parking ramp. At the time it was built, this skyscraper became, by period records, the 8th tallest building in all of Latin America. Construction starts in 1990 and moves fast, with 2 architecture firms working in parallel. In 1993, Brillembourg dies of cancer. A year later, one of the worst banking crises in Venezuela's history hits. Dozens of financial institutions collapse. The state takes over the entire banking system. Metropolitan Bank falls along with all the rest, and Confinanzas, with no bank behind it and no founder, loses its funding overnight. Work stops. By then, only Tower A had been structurally completed. The rest of the complex was stuck at 70%. Cranes frozen mid-air, unset concrete on some floors, entire balconies with no railings, windows that never got installed in hundreds of openings. The state ends up with the property through a deposit guarantee agency, and in 2001 it even goes up for auction, starting at $60 million. Nobody bids. Not one private buyer, not one public entity. And so it sits, frozen, for 15 years, a giant 190-meter concrete shell in the heart of Caracas, picked apart bit by people ripping out the aluminum window frames to sell as scrap. Nobody knew what to do with it. Until 2007, when somebody decided they did. September 17th, 2007. A group of homeless families walks into the abandoned tower. At first, they just set up tents and makeshift shelters in the ground floor lobby. Weeks later, they've already occupied and reorganized most of the building. This wasn't an isolated case. Back then, Caracas had an organized movement, the so-called Movimiento de Pobladores, giving political and logistical support to thousands of families occupying empty buildings across the city. More than 75 occupations in the capital alone, backing more than 2,500 families. The Tower of David was, without knowing it yet, the biggest and most visible of them all. In the first days, around 200 families move in. Hugo Chávez's government, deep in its 21st century socialism speech, doesn't evict them. He'd spent years encouraging working-class communities to occupy empty buildings, framing housing as a right rather than something you buy and sell. And the Tower of David fit that story perfectly. A building put up by bankers who'd bankrupted the country, now occupied by the very people those same banks had refused a home. So the state let it be. Family after family climbs up with their mattresses, their furniture, whatever they can carry on their backs. By 2011, around 2,500 people are living there. At its peak, different sources put the number between 3,000 and 5,000 residents, spread up through floor 28 of 45. Above that height, the building stayed an empty shell open to the sky. Too high to run services to, too dangerous to move into. People with no home, a home with no people. It looked solved in one stroke. But nobody had stopped to think about one detail that would shape every second of life inside. That building was never finished. People hadn't moved into a building. They'd moved into the skeleton of one, and now they had to fix, with their own hands, everything a finished building already comes with. Over time, that mix of danger and normal life produced scenes that looked like something from another planet. A girl riding her bike down the hallways of the 20th floor, dodging holes that opened straight onto empty air like it was any old courtyard. A dog that went missing for weeks turned up living, nobody quite sure how it got there, on the 45th floor, the highest one in the whole tower, and no neighbor ever found a way to bring it down. And this was just getting started. Because living without an elevator in a 45-story tower isn't an inconvenience. It's a daily physical threat, multiplied by thousands of people every day. The fix they came up with was as clever as it was dangerous: motorcycles. Inside the building itself, along the concrete ramps once meant for parking cars, makeshift motorcycle taxis carried people up the first 10 floors, charging a fare per ride. A vertical taxi service inside a skyscraper. The driver passed storefronts selling rice and cooking oil, a barber shop with an actual chair, a room where someone dyed hair under a bare light bulb, while through the glassless window openings you could see the lights of Caracas falling away toward the valley. At the 10th floor, the ramp ran out. From there you got off the bike and kept going on foot, up an unlit staircase to the 22nd floor, where somebody had rigged up, against all logic, a hand pump strong enough to push water that high. From there on, it was all raw concrete steps, with openings straight onto empty air. There were falls. There were deaths that never would have happened in a finished building. Electricity got handled the same way it does in any informal neighborhood across Latin America. Pirated wiring, running through ventilation shafts all through the tower. A system so unstable that, according to residents, if a floor plugged in too many appliances at once, it would blow the power for the entire level. And with all that improvised electricity running through bare concrete, a fire could spread in minutes across 28 floors with no real emergency exit. But the most dangerous thing wasn't the structure. It was who controlled the tower. With no police, no formal management, something else filled that power vacuum. Internal groups, some linked to former convicts who'd led the original takeover, who charged families a kind of fee for a floor, set their own rules, and, according to residents who spoke out later, handed out their own punishments. There was only one way in or out of the building for the thousands of people living inside. And that single entrance was also the tower's biggest tool of control. Whoever guarded that door decided who got in and who didn't. The solution to the housing problem had, without anyone planning it, created a parallel power system inside one of Caracas's tallest buildings. One the Venezuelan state formally stayed out of, but had no interest in entering either. And yet inside that same informal control, every family found a way to make their own a space that, originally, had been exactly the same for everyone. An empty concrete rectangle, unfinished. Some left the bare brick showing, others tiled the floor with second-hand tiles. There were near luxury apartments with huge TVs and fabric sofas, right next to others that barely had cinder block dividers between one room and the next. On the outside, everyone had started from the same abandoned skeleton. On the inside, each one told a different story of ingenuity, of resources, and of how long that family had spent rebuilding, brick by brick, something close to a home. And here's the detail that changes how you have to read this whole story. The obvious assumption would be that the Tower of David collapsed into total chaos, survival of the fittest, no order at all. Let's be honest, not everyone agreed with the more optimistic reading. Gustavo Izaguirre, Dean of the School of Architecture and Urban Planning at the Central University of Venezuela, visited the tower and publicly described it as an inadequate housing space, an example of what he called anti-housing. A dangerous place, full of real structural risks, where no engineer would ever certify the conditions as safe to live in. And he had a point, technically. There were no blueprints, no structural calculations for the new loads residents were adding as they built their own rooms, no inspections at all. But for the thousands of people living inside, the tower wasn't an academic debate about what counts as adequate housing. It was simply their home. And what the people who went in and documented it found was the exact opposite of what the word slum usually conjures up: a surprisingly strict social order. In 2012, the Swiss-Venezuelan firm Urban Think Tank, along with Dutch photographer Iwan Baan and critic Justin McGuirk, went in to document the tower in depth. What they found upended every assumption in international architecture. An order even more organized than expected, comparable to many legal neighborhoods in Caracas itself. Every floor had elected resident representatives who assigned maintenance duties on a rotation, sweeping hallways, waxing floors, painting shared walls. There were agreed-upon quiet hours between neighbors. There was a fully functioning evangelical church. A gym on the 30th floor where the weights and bars were built from pulleys and gears recycled from the elevators that had never been installed. Barbershops, daycares, corner stores on several floors so nobody had to walk down 20 flights for a bag of rice. Even an unlicensed dentist seeing patients. And there was one gesture that said more than any statistic. Some residents, instead of leaving their brick walls bare, layered another coat of brick on top like wallpaper, purely for looks. Just so their home would feel more like a home and less like an abandoned construction site. Iwan Baan, the photographer who spent months documenting all this, described the ingenuity of these people as something that left him completely stunned. People had built brick by brick with no architect, no engineer, no official permit of any kind, a complete urban infrastructure inside the ruins of a failed financial project. And the architecture world reacted in a way nobody expected. In 2012, Urban Think Tank's work on the Tower of David won the Golden Lion at the Venice Architecture Biennale, the most prestigious prize in the field worldwide. They weren't honoring it as a tragedy. They were honoring it as a serious argument that this improvised city deserved to be studied as a model, not written off as a failure. A full book on the subject came out the following year. Torre David, Informal Vertical Communities, and Urban Think Tank even shot a full documentary inside the building before the eviction. The story even leaked into fiction. In 2013, the American series Homeland set an entire episode inside the Tower of David, though they ended up filming in Puerto Rico because shooting in the real building, with thousands of people actually living there, was simply impossible. That fragile balance, admired by architects around the world, lasted exactly as long as it stayed politically convenient. In July 2014, Nicolas Maduro's government announces the eviction, just days after word gets out that Venezuela is negotiating with Chinese banks interested in buying and redeveloping the whole complex. The process is slow, done in phases, negotiated floor by floor over nearly a full year. Many families are promised relocation to new social housing built on the outskirts of Caracas. Some do get those homes, and the images of the move are almost surreal. Families carrying flat-screen TVs, refrigerators, mattresses, even pets down the stairs. The same kind of stuff in any normal move, just hauled by hand down 20 or 30 flights with no elevator. But several families later report something almost ironic. They arrived at their new homes only to find them already occupied by other squatters in the same kind of informal situation they were supposedly leaving behind. The eviction wraps up in May 2015. The Tower of David sits officially empty for the first time in 8 years. The deal with the Chinese banks, the one everyone talked about, never actually happens. And then, in 2018, nature adds a chapter to this story that nobody had written. On August 21st of that year, the strongest earthquake to hit Venezuela in a century shakes Caracas. The top 5 floors of the Tower of David, already empty for 3 years, tilt outward about 25 degrees in a partial collapse visible from much of the city, with the Mercantile Tower behind it. The skeleton that thousands of people once turned into a city now hangs visibly crooked over the Caracas skyline. Venezuelan authorities had to publicly clarify that despite how it looked, it wasn't an immediate risk of full collapse at that point. Luckily, by then there was nobody left inside to get hurt. The eviction 4 years earlier had already taken care of that. Today, the Tower of David is still standing, tilted, guarded, with no clear purpose. 3 separate failures stacked on top of each other. The collapse of a 1990s financial boom, the failure of a state that never managed to finish it or tear it down, and the improvised engineering of thousands of people forced to build themselves a home inside the wreckage of the first 2. When a building gets abandoned mid-construction, it doesn't stay empty. Someone sooner or later finds a way to live in it, with or without permission, with or without an engineer, with or without the law. We've seen it in occupied factories in Argentina, in half-built towers in Mexico, in empty lots all over the world. Urban emptiness never lasts because there's always somebody more desperate for a roof than willing to wait for the system to hand them one properly. The real question was never whether people would occupy that tower. It was what kind of order they'd build inside it once nobody else would give them one. And for 8 years, inside the Tower of David, the answer won a golden lion in Venice. An entire city, with its own rules, its own trades, and its own way of looking out for itself. If you're into these kinds of stories, buildings with a life of their own, real failures, and what people build when the system walks away, this is your channel. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one.